Here's the breaking news. Jay Powell, the man who controls interest rates in the United States, just received a grand jury subpoena from the Department of Justice. The official reason? Alleged cost overruns on Federal Reserve building renovations. But Powell isn't staying quiet. He's fighting back publicly, and he's making some explosive claims about what this is really about. Spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with construction costs. Let's break down everything happening behind the scenes, because this story goes way deeper than the headlines suggest. So what exactly happened? The U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. impaneled a criminal grand jury. They issued subpoenas to the Federal Reserve regarding 2 historic building renovation projects. On the surface, this looks like a straightforward investigation into government spending. But here's where things get interesting. Powell himself released a video statement addressing these charges head-on. He didn't hide behind lawyers. He didn't issue a boring press release. He looked directly at the American people and said something remarkable. He stated that this unprecedented action should be viewed within the broader context of ongoing pressure from the current administration. In other words, Powell is claiming this investigation is politically motivated. He went further. He said the threat of criminal charges is a direct consequence of the Federal Reserve making interest rate decisions based on economic data rather than following presidential preferences. Think about that for a second. The chairman of the Federal Reserve is publicly accusing the administration of using the Justice Department as a weapon to seize control of monetary policy. That's not a small accusation. Now let's talk about what's really going on here. Why would anyone want Jay Powell out of his position so badly? Here's the answer: control. Powell's term as Federal Reserve Chairman runs until May. His seat on the Board of Governors extends until 2028. If Powell were to resign or be removed, it would give the administration a 4-3 majority on the Federal Reserve Board. That means complete control over the Federal Open Market Committee. And what does that committee do? It sets interest rates. Whoever controls interest rates controls the economic narrative. They can make borrowing cheaper before elections. They can influence markets. They can claim credit for economic growth. This isn't about building renovations. This is about power over America's financial system. And Powell knows it. In his statement, he emphasized that he has served under 4 different administrations, Republicans and Democrats. He's carried out his duties without political interference every single time. His message was clear. He's not backing down. But this story actually started months ago. Remember that awkward moment at the Federal Reserve construction site? Trump visited the renovation project with Senator Tim Scott. They put on hard hats, they pulled out documents, and they tried to publicly embarrass Powell over budget numbers. It was supposed to be a gotcha moment. Trump pointed to figures showing costs had ballooned from $2.7 billion to $3.1 billion. Powell's response? He examined the documents carefully. Then he calmly explained that the numbers included a completely separate building that was finished 5 years earlier. In other words, they were comparing apples to oranges. Powell essentially corrected the record on live television. Now, here's something important to understand about these renovations. The Federal Reserve buildings were constructed in the 1,930 seconds. They haven't been significantly updated since then. We're talking about structures with outdated electrical systems, no modern fire suppression, antiquated heating and cooling, and serious contamination issues, including lead and asbestos. Anyone who has ever renovated an old building knows what happens. You open up a wall expecting one thing and find something completely different. Unexpected pipes, bedrock where you planned an elevator, contamination that requires specialized removal. Cost overruns in projects like this are almost inevitable. Add in the fact that construction costs have skyrocketed since the pandemic, and the budget increases start making a lot more sense. Here's where things get really interesting. Jay Powell isn't the first person to face this kind of pressure. Let's look at the track record. Senator Adam Schiff was accused of mortgage fraud. According to reports, investigators couldn't gather enough evidence to even convene a grand jury. New York Attorney General Letitia James faced 3 separate attempts at indictment. The first was thrown out because the prosecutor was allegedly illegally appointed. The next 2 attempts failed completely. That's 3 strikes. Former FBI Director James Comey had his initial indictment dismissed. A new one hasn't materialized. Former CIA Director John Brennan has investigators scrambling in Florida courts. Still no indictment. Do you see the pattern here? Grand jury subpoenas make for great headlines. They create the appearance of wrongdoing. They generate news cycles. But subpoenas don't equal guilt, and they certainly don't guarantee indictments. Powell seems to understand this playbook. That's why he's fighting back publicly instead of staying silent. Now, here's a fascinating piece of context that might explain everything. Some political observers have a theory about what motivates these kinds of confrontations. Remember the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner? Barack Obama publicly roasted Trump in front of the entire Washington elite. He mocked his conspiracy theories. He joked about his business decisions. He even showed a fake image of the White House redesigned with gold columns. The cameras caught Trump sitting stone-faced while the entire room laughed. Many believe that moment planted a seed, a desire to prove something, to never be embarrassed like that again. And what happened at that construction site with Jay Powell? Trump got corrected publicly by someone who knew the facts better than he did. History suggests that kind of embarrassment doesn't get forgotten. Let's zoom out and consider what's actually at stake here. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent. That independence is what gives the US dollar credibility around the world. When investors know that monetary policy is based on economic data rather than political whims, they trust the system. If that independence gets compromised, the consequences could be severe. Markets could become unpredictable. Inflation could spiral. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency could weaken. This isn't just about one man's job. It's about the fundamental structure of American economic governance. Powell made this point directly. He said, the real question is whether the Fed will continue making decisions based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether monetary policy will be directed by political pressure. That's the choice America faces right now. There's one more thing worth mentioning. The timing of these subpoenas is curious. Right now, multiple controversies are swirling. Legal challenges to tariff policies are working through the courts. Cases involving other Federal Reserve Board members are pending before the Supreme Court. When you're facing bad news on multiple fronts, what's the best strategy? Change the subject. Create a new headline. Shift attention somewhere else. A criminal investigation into the Federal Reserve Chairman certainly accomplishes that goal. Whether that's the actual motivation remains to be seen. But the timing raises legitimate questions. So where does this leave us? Jay Powell is under investigation. He's fighting back publicly, and he's making it clear he believes this is about controlling interest rates, not construction costs. The administration denies any improper motivation. Grand juries are examining documents. Lawyers are preparing arguments. And the future of Federal Reserve independence hangs in the balance. One thing is certain, this story is far from over. The question now is simple. Will America's central bank remain independent? Or will monetary policy become just another political tool? The answer to that question could affect every single American's financial future. Stay informed, stay engaged, because what happens next matters.